Welcome to Military Miniatures magazine. In this issue, we are going to paint Games Workshop Tau Fire Warriors in their attractive Tau Light Ochre full dress uniforms. We began by spraying these miniatures Tau Light Ochre. That's right, we sprayed the uniform color directly onto the naked, unprimed plastic. We find that priming, undercoating, zenithal highlighting and similar gimmicks just add layer upon layer of paint until the fine detail of the miniature is obscured enough that it becomes difficult to paint. So why shoot yourself in the foot and make painting needlessly difficult when acrylic paints, especially artist acrylics, adhere to plastic miniatures so well that priming isn't necessary at all, even for wargame troops. While the figures were drying, we consulted the Adobe color wheel to find the most attractive triad of colors compatible with beige red. As it turned out, Games Workshop got it right when they recommended a medium brown like Rhinox hide and a blue-gray like rust gray to go with Tau Light Ochre in their painting instructions. The best match in our paint inventory is Revell 36.381 Braun RAL 8025, which does indeed appear to be nicely compatible with beige red. RAL 8025 Brown is the color of the overalls these figures are wearing under their armor, so this will take some time to apply everywhere. It's important not to get any brown paint on the beige red armor or weapons, so any paint spills will have to be wiped off immediately. We are using a size 2 brush here because it allows us to work fast and still get into the tight spots between armor plates. Painting the arm underneath the shoulder pad looks a bit difficult, but even if we were to miss an area here, it wouldn't show. We just need to make sure that we don't hit the shoulder pad, the hand, or the pulse rifle with brown paint. At the right shoulder, too, we carefully paint around the armor plate, just so we don't have to fix any paint spills later. The helmeted figures are shown with the medium brown overalls apparently covering the head inside the helmet as well. The bareheaded figures, on the other hand, are shown with their blue-gray flesh exposed, not wearing a medium brown hood. Our next paint is a neutral gray we will be using for the fire cast badge, the gloves and any metal parts of weapons. To account for aerial perspective, we never use black paint for any black uniform items or metal parts on small-scale miniatures. Why waste time underpainting something black only to edge highlight and glaze it back up to dark gray, when we can paint an item dark gray to begin with and shade it black later? A neutral gray badge on a beige red shoulder pad actually looks realistically weathered because the contrast is so much more subtle. This Tau Firecast badge will be difficult enough to paint anyway, so we need to consider how much attention we want to draw to it. Next, we need to mix our own blue-gray paint by tinting Tamiya XF63 German Gray with a small amount of XF2 White. By tinting black or dark gray paint with white, we cause a U-shift towards the blue end of the visible spectrum, which is exactly what we are looking for here. Tau flesh is a nice blue-gray color, but these armored and helmeted figures actually show very little exposed flesh. Our next color is Golden Acrylics 1370 Titanium Buff, which we use to mark the shoulder pad of this Shasui squad leader. Again, this is aerial perspective at play here. We only ever use pure white to highlight off-white items of equipment or uniforms. We don't want the shoulder pad of this Tau Fire Warrior to look like he just walked out of the showroom at his local Quantum Emporium. The Tau helmet antenna needs to be painted titanium buff as well, so that enemy snipers cannot possibly miss the squad leader. Next, we mix a small amount of Tau Light Ochre with roughly the same amount of neutral gray to cause a U-shift towards the green spectrum of visible light. The result is an attractive olive green, which we will use to paint the photon grenade pouches of these figures. If the olive green isn't dark enough yet, we can add a little more neutral gray to the mixture. The pouches have an open center section which shows how many photon grenades are in each pouch. The grenades themselves must not be painted over, they need to be left in the original beige red color. Next up are the Tau team markings, which again are painted in a highly diluted titanium buff. If you think these Team 1 markings are difficult to paint, just wait until you get to Tau Team 6. Tau team markings are a one-shot deal, you need to get them right the first time, so you had better practice painting them on cardboard or paper first. If anything goes wrong, you will be happy to have painted them off-white, so that they don't stick out like a sore thumb. The whole concept behind team markings is just plain silly, as soldiers are constantly shuffled around to fill slots in other teams and squads as casualties are replaced or particular missions call for a different deployment. Wait a minute, Sergeant. You cannot attach that soldier to second squad. His team markings have not been updated yet. Of course, the Tau are sticklers for detail. They've been known to withdraw entire formations from the front line in the middle of a tough fight to engage in an important insignia painting session. Once all the base colors have been blocked in, it is time to prepare artist oil washes for shading the miniatures. Small amounts of light ochre and ivory black oil paints are placed on cardboard to draw the linseed oil out of these paints. Removing much of the linseed oil and thinning these paints with white spirit will allow the paint to dry overnight. This ivory black comes from a cheap starter set containing 12 tubes of artist's oil paint, which allow us to mix any color we might need. The paint sat on cardboard for 30 minutes or so, and now we're ready to mix our own wash from black and ochre. The resulting mixture is a very dark olive drab, which will go very well with the beige red Tau uniform color. In the meantime, the miniatures have been protected with satin varnish to make sure that the oil wash cannot stain the paint. The oil wash is used to shade panel lines, folds in clothing, and any other recesses in weapons and equipment. Notice how capillary action pulls the oil wash into the panel lines, shading them nicely. Any paint spill can be wiped off now or later, because the oil wash is just loose pigment deposited on a sealed surface once the white spirit has evaporated completely. It is a good idea not to wipe spilled oil wash away from panel lines immediately, if doing so will pull the oil wash out of the panel line as well. Instead, allow the oil wash to dry, then use a cotton swab to carefully remove puddles of pigment from the dirtied panel. Oil-based pin washes are much thinner, more precise, and easier to clean up than acrylic-based pin washes. The difference is that acrylic washes contain acrylic paint medium, which dries to a permanent finish, whereas oil-based washes are virtually free of paint medium. Since there are only two thin layers of paint on this figure, the Tau Light Ochre uniform color and the satin varnish, the panel lines are so nice and crisp that our oil wash flows right into them. Finding the recesses and touching them with the tip of the brush is the fun part, because it really brings out the fine detail. And we don't have to worry about making mistakes with this oil wash because they can all be fixed later. Notice that an olive drab oil wash shades the panel lines on the pulse rifle enough without needlessly overpowering the Tau Light Ochre base color of the weapon. If this shading were not dark enough in some areas, we might add more black to the oil wash later and go over certain deeper recesses one more time. The panel line at the rear of the helmet is relatively shallow, which makes it more difficult to paint. So we're just going to leave the spilled wash in place and remove it with a cotton swab later when the wash is dry. Now the recesses between the photon grenades are shaded with oil wash. We also outline the armor plates with oil wash to accentuate the narrow shadows they cast onto the brown overalls below. Finally, the double-barreled muzzle of the pulse rifle is filled with oil wash to cover any ochre paint which got sprayed into it. Once the white spirit has evaporated, we can use a dry cotton swab to wipe spilled pigment off the pulse rifle and other flat parts of the figure. The easiest way to finish painting the Tau fire cast badge is to wet the badge with white spirit and let a white oil wash flow into it. While this may look messy at first, any excess white pigment can be wiped off later when the fire cast badge has completely dried. Once the oil washes were done, we protected the miniatures with flat acrylic varnish, and we're now ready to paint small details. The helmet lenses were originally blocked in with vermilion red, and we are now applying a very dark brown mixture of vermilion red and black to shade the upper right-hand half of each lens. Now we paint the top right edge of the lens neutral gray. While the reflection will be placed here later, less light is actually reflected inside this part of the lens compared to the dark brown center. Next, we add vanadium yellow to our vermilion red lens color and paint the bottom left edge of the lens in this bright orange. This is where most of the light exits the lens, highlighting it. Finally, we place a tiny spot of pure white onto the black top edge of each lens where the reflection would occur. Okay, that second spot did not work, so we wipe it off with a clean paintbrush and try again later. It does require a little patience and trial and error to place these tiny reflections on all the lenses, but it's worth the effort. Once the small details are all painted in, we come to our final step in the painting process, very subtle dry brushing. We've not used the heavy metal method of cartoonish edge highlighting because it looks unrealistic upon close inspection. Instead, we highlight raised details adjacent to pin-washed recesses, but only if they are actually exposed to direct or reflected sunlight. There are two ways to do this. Either pick out every raised detail with the paintbrush, or dry brush the area and hit raised details in passing. Dry brushing at this stage requires a completely dry brush. Otherwise the figures will be smudged with streaks of paint, ruining them. The paint we are using is a mixture of the original Tau Light Ochre tinted with white, but we might have even used a much lighter beige color. The effect is so subtle, the only area where you can even see it is at the top edges of the folds in the medium brown overalls. Apart from that, the edges of armor plates and weapons are getting a very subtle edge highlight, but nothing like the heavy metal effect. Now that the figures are done, we can turn our attention to the bases, which have been painted a dark olive green with a few Tau Light Ochre rocks here and there. If there are beige-red rocks in this area, the Tau Light Ochre dress uniform offers at least a little camouflage. The oil wash we are using on these bases is again an olive drab mixture of yellow ochre and ivory black oil paint. The wash is highly diluted so that it easily flows into the tiniest recesses, depositing a little pigment into them. The painted rocks, even the hoofs of our Tau fire warriors, can be washed over and blended safely with this mixture. The wash gives our base a little definition where there was none before, shading the folds in the ground. Here too, we started with a rather bland olive green base with a few rocks thrown in for texture, but the oil wash suddenly brings it to life. We can keep our wash for later use by sealing the bottle cap with the second bottle cap pressed into it. So this is what our painted Tau fire warriors now look like prior to the application of static grass to their bases. Thank you for watching. For more information, you're welcome to visit our website at miniatures.de.